In the middle of nowhere on a lonely stretch of highway, there was an old gas station called Miller's Gas and Amp Go. The gas station was small and run down, with flickering neon lights and rusty gas pumps. It had been there for decades, and locals avoided it, especially after dark. There were rumors about strange things happening at the gas station, but nobody knew the full story. One late evening, I was driving home from a business trip when my car started to sputter. The gas gauge was almost empty, and I knew I needed to refuel soon. I spotted the glowing sign of Miller's Gas and Amp Go in the distance and decided to stop there. The place looked eerie, but I had no other choice. I pulled up to the pump, got out of my car, and looked around. The place was deserted. A cold wind blew, making the old sign creak. I filled my tank and then walked inside to pay. The doorbell jingled as I entered, and an old man behind the counter looked up at me. His eyes were dark and hollow, and he gave me a crooked smile. "Evening," he said in a raspy voice. "Need anything else?" "No, just gas," I replied, feeling a chill run down my spine. I handed him some cash, and he rang it up on an ancient register. As he gave me my change, I noticed a series of Polaroid photos pinned to the wall behind him. They showed various people, all with uneasy expressions, standing next to their cars at the gas station. Something about the photos felt off, like the people in them were scared. "Those pictures?" I asked, pointing at the wall. "Who are they?" The old man's smile faded. "Travelers, like yourself," he said. "Stopped here for gas, same as you." I nodded, uneasy, and turned to leave. As I walked back to my car, I heard a faint whispering sound. It seemed to come from the back of the gas station. I knew I should just get in my car and drive away, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to investigate. I walked around to the back of the building, where the whispering grew louder. The area was poorly lit, with only a dim light casting long shadows. I saw a small, rusty door slightly ajar. The whispers were coming from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped into a dark room. The smell of damp and decay hit me immediately. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a group of people huddled in the corner. Their clothes were tattered, and their faces were pale and gaunt. "Help us," one of them whispered. "Please, help us." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "What happened to you?" I asked. "We stopped for gas," another person said. "Just like you, but we never left. He traps us here, feeds off our fear." I realized they were talking about the old man. Panic surged through me. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. Suddenly, the door flew open, and the old man stood there, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome," he said with a sinister grin. "You shouldn't have come back here." I backed away, but the room felt like it was closing in on me. The trapped people reached out, their fingers cold and clammy. "Join us," they whispered. "Stay with us." I screamed and ran towards the door, pushing past the old man. I sprinted to my car and jumped in, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, my heart racing. In the rearview mirror, I saw the old man standing in the middle of the road, watching me with those glowing eyes. I drove for miles, not daring to look back. Eventually, I reached a small diner and pulled over, shaking. I ran inside and told the staff what had happened. They listened with wide eyes and then shared their own stories of Miller's Gas and Go. They said no one who encountered the old man ever left the same. I never drove down that highway again. Miller's Gas and Go remained a haunted memory, a reminder that some places are better left alone. The whispers of the trapped souls still echoed in my mind, and I knew I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. In a small town surrounded by misty hills, there stood an old hospital named Pine Grove Hospital. It was a large, imposing building with creaky floors and long, dimly lit hallways. The hospital had been around for decades and had a reputation for being haunted. People said strange things happened in the hospital, especially on the abandoned fourth floor. One stormy night, I found myself at Pine Grove Hospital. My friend Lisa had been admitted for a minor surgery, and I wanted to stay with her. The hospital was eerily quiet, and the rain tapping against the windows added to the creepy atmosphere. Lisa's room was on the third floor. As I sat by her bed, I heard strange noises coming from above us. It sounded like footsteps, even though the fourth floor was supposed to be empty. I tried to ignore it, but the curiosity got the better of me. I decided to investigate. I left Lisa's room and took the elevator to the fourth floor. As the doors opened, a cold breeze hit me. The hallway was only a few flickering lights illuminating the space. The walls were lined with old peeling wallpaper, and the air smelled musty. I walked cautiously down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I passed by empty rooms with broken beds and old medical equipment. Suddenly, I heard a whisper. It was faint, but I could make out the words, "Help me." My heart pounded as I followed the sound. It led me to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, revealing a dark room with a single bed in the middle. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. Panicking, I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, filling the room. "Help me," it repeated. I turned around and saw a figure standing by the bed. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with sadness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The nurse pointed to a corner of the room. I followed her gaze and saw an old, dusty journal lying on a small table. I picked it up and began to read. The journal belonged to a nurse named Margaret, who had worked at the hospital many years ago. According to the entries, Margaret had been blamed for a patient's death and had been tormented by guilt. Unable to bear the pain, she took her own life in that very room. The whispering continued, and I realized that Margaret's spirit was trapped in the hospital, seeking someone to understand her story. "I believe you," I said softly, hoping to bring her some peace. The whispering stopped, and the room grew colder. Margaret's figure began to fade, but before she disappeared completely, she whispered, "Thank you." The door suddenly unlocked, and I rushed out, my heart still racing. I hurried back to Lisa's room and told her what had happened. She listened intently, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "Do you think she's at peace now?" Lisa asked. "I hope so," I replied, still shaken by the encounter. The next morning, I decided to speak to the hospital staff about what I had experienced. The head nurse, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, listened carefully and nodded. She told me that many people had reported seeing Margaret's ghost over the years. They believed that her spirit was seeking forgiveness and understanding. After that night, the strange occurrences on the fourth floor seemed to stop. The hospital staff and patients no longer reported hearing whispers or seeing shadows. It seemed that Margaret had finally found peace. I left Pine Grove Hospital feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I had come to visit a friend, but ended up helping a lost soul find rest. The experience left a lasting impression on me, a reminder that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and it's up to the living to help set things right. In the heart of a bustling city, there was an old rundown motel called Sunset Lodge. Despite its shabby exterior, it had a steady stream of guests. However, there was one mystery that the motel couldn't shake. Guests who stayed in room 13 often disappeared without a trace. The motel owner, Mr. Thompson, was a gruff man who didn't believe in ghost stories. He dismissed the disappearances as mere coincidences or runaway guests. However, the staff and locals knew better. They spoke of a dark presence in room 13, something that preyed on unsuspecting guests. One summer evening, my boyfriend Mark and I checked into Sunset Lodge. We were on a road trip and needed a place to rest for the night. The only available room was room 13. Despite the eerie reputation, we decided to stay, thinking the stories were just urban legends. As we unpacked, we noticed the room had a strange smell, like damp earth. The walls were lined with old, faded wallpaper that seemed to move in the dim light. Trying to ignore the unsettling atmosphere, we decided to watch TV and relax. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. As I washed my hands, I heard a faint knocking sound coming from the walls. I leaned in closer, thinking it might be the plumbing, but the sound grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the bathroom lights flickered, and the mirror cracked. Panicking, I ran back to the bedroom to find Mark. But Mark was gone. The bed was empty, and his belongings were scattered on the floor. I called out his name, but there was no response. Frantically, I searched the room, but there was no sign of him. Desperate, I ran to the front desk. I told Mr. Thompson about the strange noises and Mark's disappearance. Annoyed and skeptical, Mr. Thompson agreed to check the room. We searched every corner, but Mark was nowhere to be found. I was inconsolable. I spent the rest of the night in the lobby, waiting for any news. The next morning, the police arrived and conducted a thorough investigation. They found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Mark had simply vanished. Over the next few days, I stayed at the motel, hoping for any news about Mark. I began to hear whispers in the halls and see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. One night, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a man, drenched in water, with a look of pure terror on his face. When I approached him, he vanished into thin air. Terrified, I sought help from a local paranormal investigator. The investigator, a woman named Sarah, had heard about the disappearances and agreed to look into it. Sarah conducted a séance in room 13, hoping to communicate with whatever was causing the disturbances during the séance. The temperature dropped and the lights flickered. Sarah asked the spirit to reveal itself. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of rushing water, and a dark, shadowy figure appeared. Sarah realized that the spirit was a former guest who had drowned in the motel's pool years ago. His spirit was trapped, unable to move on, and he was taking guests to keep him company in his eternal torment. Sarah performed a cleansing ritual, asking the spirit to let go of its anger and move towards the light. The room shook violently, and the shadowy figure screamed before finally disappearing. The atmosphere in the room lightened, and the oppressive feeling lifted. After the ritual, I felt a sense of relief, although Mark was never found. I left Sunset Lodge, grateful to Sarah for her help but heartbroken over my loss. The disappearances in room 13 ceased, and the motel slowly regained its business. Even though Sunset Lodge became a safer place, I could never forget the night Mark vanished. I moved on with my life, but the memory of that eerie room and the dark presence lurking within it remained etched in my mind. The experience taught me that sometimes the stories we dismiss as mere legends hold more truth than we could ever imagine. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. One stormy night, I was home alone while my parents were out. The wind howled, and the rain pounded against the windows, making the house feel cold and eerie. I decided to order a pizza to distract myself and make the night more enjoyable. After placing the order, I settled on the couch and turned on a scary movie, trying to keep my mind off the storm. As the movie played, the thunder rumbled, and shadows danced across the walls, making the atmosphere even creepier. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I jumped up, my heart racing, and grabbed some cash. I peeked through the peephole but saw no one there. Confused, I slowly opened the door, and there on the porch was the pizza box, but no delivery person in sight. A chill ran down my spine. I picked up the box, closed the door quickly, and locked it. Feeling uneasy, I checked the windows to see if anyone was outside, but the yard was empty. Shrugging it off, I returned to the couch, trying to shake the strange feeling. I opened the pizza box, and inside was a note. It read, Enjoy your pizza. While you can." My heart skipped a beat, and I looked around, feeling more anxious. I thought it was a prank, but it didn't feel right. Ignoring the note, I tried to watch the movie and eat my pizza, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house made me jump. Then I heard a soft knock on the back door. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I approached the back door slowly, my hands shaking. As I reached for the doorknob, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. My phone was the only source of light. I took a deep breath and opened the back door. There was nothing but the rain pouring down and the empty backyard. I closed the door quickly, locked it, and backed away, my mind racing. I tried calling my parents, but the call wouldn't go through. The storm must have knocked out the signal. Suddenly, I heard footsteps upstairs. Panic set in as I realized someone might be in the house. I grabbed a kitchen knife for protection and crept toward the staircase. The footsteps grew louder, and my heart pounded in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The figure didn't respond but started moving toward me, its shape becoming clearer in the dim light. I turned and ran back downstairs, hearing the figure following close behind. I dashed into the living room, desperately searching for a place to hide. I ducked behind the couch, clutching the knife, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps entered the room, slow and deliberate. I peeked out and saw the figure, now clearly a man, looking around. His eyes scanned the room, and he smiled, a sinister grin that made my blood run cold. "I know you're here," he taunted, his voice low and chilling. Suddenly there was a loud bang on the front door and the figure turned, distracted. I seized the opportunity and sprinted out from my hiding spot, running toward the back door. I flung it open and raced into the storm, the cold rain hitting my face as I sprinted toward the neighbor's house. I banged on their door, shouting for help. My neighbor opened the door, startled, and quickly let me in. I explained everything, still trembling. They called the police, who arrived shortly after and searched my house, but the intruder was gone. Later, my parents returned, worried sick. I told them everything, and they promised never to leave me home alone during a storm again. The pizza and the mysterious note haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I knew I'd never forget that terrifying night. From then on, I was much more careful, and the thought of ordering pizza alone made me uneasy. The stormy night had changed everything, leaving me with a lingering fear of what lurked in the shadows. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. One stormy night, I was home alone while my parents were out for dinner. The rain poured down and the wind howled outside, making me feel uneasy. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but then the lights flickered and the screen went black, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and started walking around the house. That's when I heard faint whispers coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were trying to talk to me. "Help us," the voice whispered. My heart pounded as I stood there frozen. "Who's there?" I called out, but no one answered, just more eerie whispers. I felt compelled to follow the sound, even though I was scared. The whispers led me to the basement door, which creaked open on its own. Shivering, I stepped down the dark stairs, using my flashlight to guide me. The whispers became clearer. "Help us, please." In the corner of the basement, I spotted an old, dusty mirror. The whispers seemed to come from inside it. As I got closer, I saw faint figures trapped behind the glass, their faces twisted in fear. "Please set us free," one of them whispered. I felt a mix of terror and sympathy. Unsure of what to do, I reached out and touched the mirror's surface. Suddenly, a cold wind filled the basement, and the figures began to fade. "Thank you," they whispered, disappearing into the darkness. The mirror cracked and the whispers stopped. I raced upstairs, my heart still racing. The lights flickered back on and everything seemed normal. But I knew I would never forget the whispers from the walls. When my parents returned, I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They thought it was just a story to scare them. But I knew the truth. From that day on, I never stayed home alone during a storm again. I often wondered who the trapped figures were and what had happened to them. Every time I passed by the basement door, I felt a chill run down my spine, remembering their pleas for help. Months passed, and I tried to push the memory to the back of my mind, but on stormy nights I could still hear faint whispers echoing in my ears. It was as if the house remembered too. I avoided the basement, but the memory lingered. One day I decided to research the history of our house. I went to the local library, digging through old newspapers and records. I discovered that many years ago a family had lived in our house, and they mysteriously disappeared during a terrible storm. Rumors circulated that they were trapped in the house, their spirits unable to move on. This revelation sent shivers down my spine. I realized that the figures in the mirror might have been that family, pleading for release. My heart ached for them, and I wished there was more I could have done. One evening, as another storm approached, I felt an urge to return to the basement. I knew it was risky, but I felt a strange connection to the spirit. Armed with my flashlight, I descended the creaky stairs once more. The basement was just as I remembered, dark and cold. The cracked mirror stood in the corner, silent and eerie. I approached it cautiously, my heart racing. "I'm here," I whispered. "Is there anything I can do?" To my surprise, the mirror shimmered slightly, and faint outlines appeared once more. "Thank you," they whispered, their voices barely audible. "You set us free, but we are still connected to this place." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and compassion. "Is there any way to help you move on?" I asked. "There is a key," one figure whispered. "A keepsake hidden in this house. Find it, and we can be released." Determined, I searched the basement, sifting through old boxes and dusty shelves. Finally, in an old chest, I found a small rusted key. It felt warm in my hand, almost as if it pulsed with energy. Holding the key, I returned to the mirror. "I found it," I said, my voice trembling. "Place it against the mirror," they instructed. With a deep breath, I pressed the key to the glass. A bright light enveloped the room, and I heard faint voices saying, "Thank you. We are free." The mirror shattered, and I felt a rush of wind, but this time it felt warm and comforting. The figures faded, and the basement was silent once more. I climbed back upstairs, feeling a sense of relief and closure. The whispers were gone, and the house felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. I knew the spirits were finally at peace. When my parents came home, I didn't tell them what happened. It felt like a personal experience, a connection between me and the spirits that once haunted our house. From that day on, I no longer feared storms. I knew that the spirits had found their peace, and in a way, so had I. The whispers from the walls had led me to a greater understanding of the house's history and the lingering connections between the past and present.